found out recently that Utah was being forced to redraw its congressional maps, and that would allow for one more Democratic seat. This was a surprise development that we didn't expect. We've now seen the Republicans push back on that effort in court. Can you explain what just happened?
Yeah, so, anyone who thought that the Utah Republicans were any different than the Republicans in the rest of the country when it comes to gerrymandering, and it comes to, using every tool in their toolkit to try to prevent free and fair elections were mistaken. Because, as you point out, the map that they drew in violation of the state constitution, and that was already established, was thrown out. And the trial court said to both sides, when do you need to have a new map in place for 2026? And the state said, yep, we need it by November. And the court said, okay, we'll have it by October. Well, now those same Republicans, the legislature there, has gone to the state Supreme Court and said, you know what, on second thoughts, there's not enough time. On second thought, we want to appeal this decision, and you ought to not allow there to be a new map for 2026. This case ought to remain stayed until after our appeals, till after, the 2026 election. And if there's ever relief, it'll be for 2028 and beyond. And Brian, this is exactly the kind of delaying tactic we see Republicans use in state after state after state. And we cannot allow it to happen. We cannot let them run out the clock for 2026, which could be the most important midterm election of our lifetimes.
Well, when we had initially spoken about this issue, this court that was overseeing this case was pretty strict in terms of the timeline that they put forward for this map to be returned. But does there exist any possibility that these Utah Republicans will be able to delay this thing?
Look, I mean, they're taking their best shot here, right? They've gone straight to the state Supreme Court, which is obviously a Republican-controlled court. It's in Utah after all. And they've asked them to put a halt on this. They are trying everything they can to delay this. Now, will it succeed? I certainly hope not. I mean, the fact is the people of Utah have already voted under 2 elections using what is now, by everyone's account, an illegal map. And the idea that they should be forced to suffer the indignity of a 3rd election cycle using an illegal map seems patently wrong, and something that the state Supreme Court itself, has already touched this case once, and something you would think they wouldn't want to allow. So, I'm not going to tell people that there is no chance that this will happen. What I can say is that everyone is going to fight like hell to try to prevent it from happening. This is something my law firm and I have been looking at. We have, in earlier stages in this case, tried to get involved, and we're looking at this again now. But the existing plaintiffs in this case, I'm sure they're going to fight it. But it's really important that everybody pay attention to this kind of thing, because this is the kind of thing where, the legacy media will put in the headline when the first court decision comes down. But then this kind of stuff happens.
Right.
And it doesn't get the same attention. And so It's really important that everybody pay attention. And one of the things you can do is you can share this video with your friends. And I'd encourage everyone to do that. And this other thing you can do is you can do me a favor and you could subscribe to this channel and hit the bell, because that means you'll get alerted when there are further updates and other videos. So those are 2 quick things everyone can do right now that I'd ask you to do. And they are both, Brian, unless you tell me I'm wrong, they're both free.
They are free. And I would also note another option is that I actually found this story on Democracy Docket, which is the news outlet you founded to focus on everything voting and elections. I did not see this on any of the legacy media outlets, not when you first broke it. And even now, as we get days farther and farther past this thing, still nobody's talking about this thing. So if you want to stay up to date on the stuff that actually matters and support fearless independent journalism, a great way to do that is to subscribe to Democracy Docket. I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. Mark, you had mentioned that you're looking at intervening in this case yourself. This is exactly the kind of person, and this is exactly the kind of team that we should be supporting. So again, a small step that we can all take to support Mark's work and his team's work is to subscribe to this outlet and elevate his voice that way. Mark, it's worth asking here, on what grounds do they think that they have the ability, these Republicans have the ability to say that, okay, we have unconstitutional maps, but they need to stay in place even though they're unconstitutional?
I mean, what grounds do Republicans ever need? I mean, they are shameless in the arguments they make. I mean, in this instance, what they're saying is look, we are going to appeal the court decision that that held that these maps are unconstitutional under the state constitution. In other words, we are going to challenge a lower court's decision, and therefore, state Supreme Court, we think you should stay the remedy, i.e. a new map, until you have a chance to hear this. Now, in a vacuum, that would not be correct, but it would make a certain amount of sense, even though it wouldn't be legally correct. In this instance, it doesn't make any sense because this case, like I said, has already been to the state Supreme Court once. The trial court that issued the order declaring that the map violates the law, violates state constitution, did it after the state Supreme Court sent it back with very specific parameters for the trial court to rule, and also with this trial court taking into account what the calendar is, right? What the timetable is necessary for this to be resolved in time for 2026. So it's not like the Republican legislature, number one, has not had a chance to make their case to the state Supreme Court. They did, and they lost. But number two, it's not like the moment that they lost this case, they ran to the state Supreme Court and said, hey, we need an emergency hearing on the merits, right? They're not asking for a quick resolution on the merits because they don't want that because they're going to lose. Right. What they want is the merits to go on a slow track and for the lower court decision to be stayed, which is just basically a stalling tactic. So, I think that the state Supreme Court will see through this. They should see through this. But again, this is something you and I will cover on these videos, and it is something that Democracy DACA will continue to be on top of.
Okay, so this is really important because I want you to talk about Purcell, what the Purcell doctrine is, what these Republicans in Utah are trying to do with regard to Purcell, and how this has worked elsewhere, i.e. Louisiana, Alabama, North Carolina.
Yeah, so what the Purcell doctrine says comes out of a case out of Arizona, a voting case, and it applies really as a prudential doctrine in federal courts, although many states have adopted it in one form or another. What it originally said is that courts should not make changes to voting rules close to elections, right? The idea was that if, you're September, October before an election, courts need to be very careful about changing the rules of voting to one way or the other because it can really cause mayhem for the voters, but also for the election officials. In the last, 2-3 years, it's really gotten turbocharged by this conservative Supreme Court and applied in ways that it originally was never intended to apply, including in the area of redistricting. And the Supreme Court has, for example, blocked a new map it did before the 2022 election, saying that, the fact that the map had been struck down in January or February of the election year was too close to the election. Now, again, like by the time you get to January or February, it seems like a little hard to argue that it's too close to the election. But nevertheless, they did that I think it was the case in Louisiana. And as a result, an illegal map was used in 2022. And we know that an illegal map was used in 2022 because by 2024, the Supreme Court had actually ruled it was an illegal map, and a lawful map was used. To argue that Purcell applies in September of 2025 for an election that won't be held till November of 2026 just means you never get relief because literally, we are 11 months into the election cycle. Like what is the window in which they would say Purcell doesn't apply, right? Yeah. Like what, the first 6 months of an election? Like this is now absurd to say that it is already too late because, we have not even gotten to the beginning of ballot qualifications, no less the end of ballot qualifications, no less people running, no less, states and counties having to prepare for primaries. I mean, all of that is way in the future. So I think that, like I said, this looks to me like nothing other than a stalling tactic. It is also the reason, though, why this trial court judge was very, very smart to ask the state, when is it too late? In other words, when will Purcell, in your view, kick in? And they said not until November, which is still, by the way, super early, right. But nevertheless, the trial judge said, okay, then I will get you a new map by October. And yet here we are, at the end of August, beginning of September, I guess beginning of September we are, where they're already saying, well, maybe it's too late.
Can you talk about the asymmetry at play between the two sides? Because, I interviewed Kathy Hochul about exactly this issue, about redrawing the maps in response to these Republican mid-cycle redraws that are happening, not just in Texas, but also that are moving forward in Indiana and Missouri and Florida. And I had posed this question to her about moving forward with the map redraw, even though there are some steps that have to be taken within the New York Constitution to be able to effectuate that change. And she was very focused on okay, this is the process that has to be followed. But it got me to thinking about the process that has to be followed in the other states, and they all abuse the system by relying on Purcell, by putting forward illegal maps and then relying on Purcell, so that even though they're illegal, even though judges are able to say that they're illegal, still the idea that you can't bring about some change too close to the election takes priority over changing the maps that close to an election. So can you talk about the asymmetry at play between the two parties, where you have the Democrats that are so focused on making sure to practice good governance and not break any rules or norms or procedures, and then you have the Republicans who expressly use the idea of abusing the system as their strategy, as their express strategy to be able to garner whatever change that they want to see?
Yeah, look, you're exactly right. And and your viewers know, I have been very outspoken on this very topic. I originally called for 7 Democratic states to redistrict 30 Republicans out of office. That would have, by the way, included not 5 from California. It would have included 8 or 9 from California, as well as the other states you mentioned: New York, New Jersey, Virginia, where hopefully we'll have a Democratic governor in a few weeks, Oregon, Washington, Illinois. So I've been very clear that this is an existential crisis for democracy, and that we cannot be just responding to what Republicans are doing. We have to dissuade them from doing it,
Right,
by showing that we're willing to do it, and even more, because I think if we do that, then what will happen is Republicans will stop, right? They will want to de-escalate, and then none of this will have to happen. So that's been my longstanding position. So that is one asymmetry, is that there is this concern on our side that this is all done more in sorrow than to gain advantage. And I think that is an asymmetry. The other asymmetry, though, is in the law, which you point out, which is that Purcell only binds courts. Purcell doesn't bind legislatures. It doesn't bind governors. So if a state passes a map, it can never be too late. In other words, Purcell doesn't say there's a point at which the legislature can't pass a new map. What it says is there's a point at which the courts can't stop the legislature.
yeah,
Right. So there is this very, very asymmetrical world in which Republican legislatures can do illegal things, and the courts will say it's too late for us to do anything around voting because it's too close. But Democrats don't want to do things that they think might be illegal. I mean, they, by the way, might not be illegal, right? These are
right.
these are unsettled legal questions very oftentimes. To what extent does the New York State Constitution require this or that or whatever, right? But Democrats don't want to do something that might later be viewed to be illegal. And therefore, they don't take advantage of Purcell, which would give deference in the first instance to the legislative enactment while the courts sorted it out. So there is an asymmetry both in mentality. I do think Democratic governors and legislators, they want to follow the law. They want to preemptively assume that good governance is constitutional under the state and federal constitution. We have seen lots of instances where conservative Supreme Court justices have said good governance is not constitutional, is not required. And so Republican legislatures are willing to lean into that. Democratic legislatures and governors are not willing to lean into that. And that is just the reality. Welcome to my law practice. People who say to me, Mark, it's amazing, you win all these cases. And I say, just imagine if I was a Republican, how many cases I'd win, right? Yeah. I mean, if I had the courts that they had, and I had the ability to have legislatures do the kind of shenanigans that Republicans do,
Yeah.
I'd win even more. So I feel good about my record, but there's no question there is an advantage. The other side brings a lot more advantages to a lot of these fights.
Right. Well, look, we will, of course, stay on top of this issue as soon as we have any response from the court in Utah, as we try and ensure that these newly redrawn maps to allow a Democratic representative, who I believe will be representing the Salt Lake City area.
What it would do is it would require the creation of a district around Salt Lake City,
Right.
which, by the way, it would not be like a 70% Democratic district. It'd be a fair district, which Democrats have won before. Congressman McAdams, a Democrat, held that seat when it was a Salt Lake City district. But Republicans can't stand gerrymandering Salt Lake into lots of little pieces. In the same way, by the way, they're now going to do to Kansas City.
Right.
In the same way we saw them do in Texas. God knows what they'll do to some of the cities in Florida.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, this war on cities that you see taking shape in places like LA and Chicago in one form around, deployment in the military. They are also being, when we talk about a lot of these redistricting cases, very oftentimes what is really going on is just a different way of targeting cities.
Right. Well, as soon as we have any update here, we will bring it to you. Again, the place that I found out about this first and foremost, and virtually the only outlet that's actually covering this issue, which I would argue is much more important than most of the issues that we read about on a daily basis, is Democracy Docket. So I'm going to put that link again right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Mark Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.